Sangeeta, and for my 1960s interview, I am interviewing my best friend's mom, Anne Brenna. Okay. Hello, Anne.
Hi, Sangeeta.
So I have a couple questions. Yes, and well, let's get started. Okay. My first question. So, where were you living during the 1960s?
I was a teenager in the 1960s, and I was living in New Jersey.
Wow, New Jersey?
Mm-hmm.
Was that where you were born?
I was born in New York, and then my family moved to New Jersey when I was 9 years old, so I grew up there. And the 60s were a very special time in my life, because I sort of came of age and discovered who I was in the 1960s.
Wow, deep. Well, you must have heard about the Vietnam War, right?
Oh, of course. I was a protester of the Vietnam War.
So that's what you were doing during the Vietnam War? You were protesting?
Yes. I was also going to college and to high school. But I was very much against the war, and I went on marches in Washington to protest the war. And I traveled around a little bit I would go to different rallies and protest meetings and staged sit-ins at my college.
Wow. Well, did you have a feeling that the Vietnam War was a thing that we should have had? Did you agree with the Vietnam War?
No, I was protesting against America's involvement in Vietnam.
Okay.
So I thought we should not be sending soldiers over there and watching them die for a cause that really had nothing to do with America's interests.
Wow. After you heard that the war was over, what did you do or feel?
I felt great relief that it was finally over. I felt very sad for all the young men who lost their lives. And about the time it was over, I was just getting done with college, and I wanted to make sure that I did something worthwhile with my life.
Oh, so
I actually turned out to be, I went into journalism so that I could report on how our government would make decisions and do things, and so I became a reporter, eventually working for the Los Angeles Times.
Yeah, and you're still are, right?
No, actually, I left the LA Times 2 years ago, and I do freelance writing now for AOL and Huffington Post and LA Business Journal and lots of websites. And I've sort of moved away from politics because people your age and your generation don't seem to care that much about politics and decisions the government makes and being a watchdog of the government. So there's more work for people like me and writing about celebrities and things like that. So that's what I do.
Well, you must have heard about the space race and the first man landing in the moon. How did you feel when...
I remember exactly where I was when the first man took his first steps on the moon. My family was up in the Catskills, upstate New York, and we were all gathered around the television, like every other family in America, just glued to the TV, and we watched him in his big moon suit get out and take a few steps and say, one small step for man, one giant step for mankind. And it was a very emotional event in the history.
And you remembered
oh, yes.
Wow, it took me it was a long time to remember it. Well, JFK was the president.
Yes.
Yes. And when he was assassinated, were you devastated?
I was actually just in 8th grade then. Actually, it may have been 6th grade. But I remember I had the only male teacher in the school. It was an elementary school, and it was all women teachers. And I remember one of the women teachers came to the door and signaled for my teacher to walk out into the hallway. And when he came back in, I mean, as soon as he walked out, all the kids began fooling around and making noise and throwing paper airplanes and hitting each other with rulers and whatever else we did. But when he walked back in, he looked so stricken that everybody just be quiet and sat down. And it was complete silence. And he sat down on his desk and he put his hands out like this. And no one moved. And we didn't know what was going on. And then he looked up and he said, President Kennedy has been assassinated. And we had a conversation about it in the classroom. And it was very emotional and very sad, and I still remember it to this day. I also remember it was the first time I had ever seen, imagine seeing a teacher cry, and a man teacher cry. It stayed with me. And then we didn't have school for a couple of days because the whole country was in mourning over his death.
Wow. So did you you were a sixth grader, or?
Yeah, it was sixth. I think it was sixth, yeah.
And did you really care, or did you
I think,
have any feelings?
I think, John,
towards it?
my parents were very involved, and they were civil rights supporters, and we talked about politics a lot in my house. So I knew the name of the president, and I knew that he was a really good man and was doing lots of good things and helping people who really needed help. He led the civil rights movement, and he took care of the people who needed the most care in America. So it's something that my parents talked about all the time. And I remember during his assassination and burial, no one went out of the house. We stayed in the house and glued to the television, watching the procession. And I remember his son, John was about 3 or 4, and he sat there with his short pants and waving an American flag, and everybody filed solemnly past the casket. I mean, it was very moving. So it was one of those memories of my childhood.
We saw a video about his assassination, and well, I was totally horrified.
Yeah.
I mean, yeah, it was horrible.
I actually made a trip to Dallas, and I went to the square that he was killed at, and I just
the X mark.
Yeah, and I just remember it was much smaller than I thought it was going to be. Now, in part, all this took place when I was a child, so I think you always think things are much bigger, but it was just a really small little square. I mean, it was a little park, a little triangle, and it was kind of a little anticlimactic.
Okay, well, so you remember the hippie times in the 1960s?
I was a hippie. I wore bell bottoms, and I think it was a lot of it centered around the music, the Beatles, and it was really an expression of freedom, and it was a great time to be a teenager or a young adult. It was. I remember those days very fondly, and they very much shaped who I am today. What I believe in and the values I keep and try and share with my children and my children's friends.
Well, wow. Thank you.
My pleasure.
It was, I don't know, I can't say much, but it was thank you.
Okay.
Okay.
Good luck on your report.